You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and in this episode, we are going to talk about a project that's very near and dear to my heart, Matt's heart, and a lot of people in our community. For 13 years, the ICM Forum has hosted a poll of obscure favorites. It's called 500, 400, or 500 is bigger than 400. It's a little bigger than sign. It's a little bit of an in-joke, but it refers to the fact that we showcase 500 films with less than 400 checks on icmforum.com, which is a website comparable to IMDb and Letterboxd for those not aware of it. We used to use this site so much, especially in the past, which is why that became our baseline. And it's been one of our most popular and beloved polls for a very, very long time. I mean, anyone who's been in our forum knows that there's pretty much always 3, 4, even more polls going every single month, and people don't really have time to participate in every single one, but this one is one of the few that really gets people to come together and put in the time to share their obscure favorites. And as anyone who's listened to this podcast knows, if there's one thing we love, it's sharing our obscure favorites. In these 13 years, only 6 films have taken the number 1 spot. And these are the films we will focus on today. Most of which have gone on to no longer be eligible. One of them has arguably gone on to become a at least semi-recognized classic. But in my mind, all 6 still deserve an extra shout out. And it's also nice to see which managed to get enough people from all of the various niches and subcultures at the ICM Forum, just get us to join hands and say, this is the best, or at least, this is the one a majority of us, or a large amount of us, like a genuine shared love. So the 6 winners are in chronological order of when they won: Leather Never Sent, Sundays and Cybele, Muddy River, Carriage to Vienna, Rapture, and finally, Birth Certificate. You'll find more information about them in the description below, and we may get into some spoiler territory, not quite sure. In those cases, there will be these little time jump links below as well, so you can just quickly click on and not have anything spoiled for you if you haven't seen the film in question and is so inclined. So let's just get the ball rolling on this episode, and great to have you on board, Matt. It ended up being a duo episode with just you and me. So I'd love to just hear quickly, like, what's your experience with our list of 500 films with less than 400 checks, and how are you just feeling about this episode?
Really happy to be here to talk about these films. I think there's 2 projects that happen on the forum, doubling the canon, which, happens on some other forums as well. But I would say that the biggest participation comes from ours, and also 500 less than 400. So I've probably been voting on this poll for about 10 years. I do remember being very confused when I was a member on IMDb, looking up various lists of films and seeing 500 is less than 400 and thinking, no, it isn't. It's greater. And but also just finding these lists very interesting. There's lots of different people, and all their lists were different and all said 500, 400. I thought, these are very interesting. Took me probably a year to work out that it was a poll happening on ICM Forum. So I do think there is a lot of joy in this poll, really, because we're essentially trying to resurrect films that are very strong indeed, but that really people never saw. And I guess, some of that's for particular reasons. Maybe there are films that were really nice films that were made behind the Iron Curtain that never made it to cinemas in the West. It could be all sorts of reasons, but it's surprisingly easy to find films that hardly anybody has seen that are absolutely majestic. And I think in our list of 6 winners today, 4 of them are personal favourites of mine. I think you said in the intro that one of them is a film that people know a lot more these days. I imagine you were speaking about A Letter Never Sent. I think, that one got picked up on DVD by the Criterion Collection, which is a collection of movies that film buffs are very well aware of, and they watch what films come out on that label. So I guess it would be really nice if some of the other films that haven't been released as conspicuously that we're about to talk about could get more of a viewing. So Carriage to Vienna has come out fairly recently on Blu-ray by Second Run in the UK, and I watched Birth Certificate on a Polish release actually, but with Muddy River I don't think it's really very available at the moment, so it would be nice to see something like a Criterion release for that. And I think Oguri is a really underappreciated director. Seems to have made a number of interesting films. So if anyone's listening and has any influence on what gets put on some of these labels, we recommend these films to you.
Absolutely, and indeed, 11% is the film that has kind of blown up along with Mikhail Klatosov in general, thanks to Cranes Are Flying and Soy Cuba, possibly bigger. I mean, Scorsese and several other famous names kind of resurrected Soy Cuba, or I Am Cuba as it's known in English, to become this rediscovered classic. 11% has actually not entered like Titan Sound List or Nation Pictures Dante, etc. It's still comparatively obscure, but at least it got the Criterion release, and people know it. When you go places, people genuinely know that film now. In most of these other cases, I think that these are fairly resurrected indeed. Like they're deep cuts, and it's sad that they're deep cuts, but a lot of classics start off that way. They do get rediscovered, they do get re-released, and Criterion has played a very, very huge role in that. Maybe we need to just get a tie-in with Criterion, need to get some names, share some numbers. Any of these films that has made it to the number one on this list pretty much hits across the cinephile spectrum. Like they should be a hit with the Criterion viewing community as well, because that's a pretty similar overlap. In terms of my experience with the list, I think I voted since the beginning, because I have been a part of the forum since the beginning. I would be very surprised if I missed one, though it's very possible. It's near and dear to my heart. I think I found so many favorites from this list. In fact, I think I saw most of these films for the first time thanks to being on this list as well. Like I know I saw Muddy River because it was on this list. I'm pretty sure I saw Carriage to Vienna because it was on this list. I know again I saw Birth Certificate because it was climbing up on this list. So if it had not been for this list, there are so many classics that I would not have experienced. And it's not just, the top of the crop, the number ones. I mean, we have challenges on the forum, at least one a year. We actually work on the list together. There's another challenge where we prepare for it as well. So there's a lot of work to explore the list. The extended list, there's also 1,000, it's less than 400 list that's available if you want like 500 additional deep cuts. So this is just such a great way to discover films. Obviously, you get, like, the way we do this poll is that people submit their own lists of favorites, and nobody's taste is the same. There's so many subcultures and niches, and I think the ICM forum has pretty much all of them. So there's going to be a lot of deep cuts on the list that's not for me, and there's going to be a lot of deep cuts that I love that other people will reject. But I think that the higher you get to the top, the closer you get to films that could genuinely be consensus films as well. And with these 6 films, I can see all of them ascending to a consensus statement. I mean, actually, I think all of them are great. Not all of them are favorites for me, but like I could see them being in that all-time conversation. So let's see if this episode has any kind of impact on that, and if we can get any of you listeners to watch them. Letter Never Sent is the easiest. It's readily available on the Criterion channel, so feel free to jump on that. And that's also the first film we will be talking about today, because it was our very first winner. It won the first and second year the poll existed, and I think shortly around that time, Criterion released it, and it became ineligible. It got the checks, and obviously it became more of an established classic, even though it still has a way to go. I mean, it's actually so big that we even have an episode more or less dedicated to it. We did a full episode about Mikhail Kalatozov, and we focused in on The Cranes Are Flying, Letter Never Sent, and I Am Cuba. You know, if you're interested, you can go back and listen to that one for even more opinions on this film. But I'm going to let you speak in a second, Matt. But I'll just say, this is, if you count this as a disaster film, I believe this is the greatest disaster film of all time. If you count it as a survival film, it's probably the greatest survival film of all time, in my view. It's one of the best shot films of all time. It looks so stunning. The camera work is incredible. And I think, from the poster and everything, that this is going to be a forest fire film. So the flames, like the experience of being in that fire, wow, like it's just incredible. I remember saying on that episode we did that, I can't believe they were allowed to do it. I can't believe they allowed the actors to duck under burning trees. I can't believe that the camera managed to get that close without melting. Like, you feel like you're in that fire with them. It's that insane. It goes on for such a long time, and the quick summary is essentially that you have a group of Soviet scientists slash pioneers searching for diamonds in Siberia, and they get caught in a wildfire, and things start going very, very, very wrong. But yeah, huge favorite for me. What are your thoughts on Letter Never Sent, Matt? Because obviously you were not part of that episode.
Yes, I think we should clarify that they're searching for diamonds, but essentially for scientific purposes. It's not a Western treasure hunt movie. I do find this film very interesting. I probably wouldn't classify it as a disaster movie, just because for me, and I don't know how unusual this take is. Like, for me, the fire is almost metaphorical. The thing that really grabbed my heart about the movie is that there's basically a unrequited love thing going on. So there's a guide with 3 geologists. It's Tanya, Andrei, and Sergei. And Andrei and Sergei are both interested in Tanya, shall we say. And I think there's a fight at one point, actually. So Sergei punches Andrei just because he's got really jealous. But I think it's almost that emotional state that becomes apparent in the outer world when a forest fire happens. So I don't know if you agree with that take, but to me that's a lot of what the movie is about. And I think as well, you were talking about how difficult it must be to film. I think this film had a very strange release in that it was entered into the Cannes Film Festival in 1960, but it got withdrawn because Kalatozov wanted to refilm some shots. So I think that's one reason why it's less well known in that the release wasn't handled particularly well. And I think like another thing that I'd bring out as well in terms of Kalatozov being resurrected, he is quite a strange character. I think both of us have seen this film, Nail in the Boot.
Oh yes.
He's he really is a dyed in the wool Stalinist, and unlike a lot of Soviet directors, I think, who were trying to get things past the censors or not really having their hearts in it as much as they might be requested to by the authorities, but Kalatozov was actually a very fervent Stalinist, I believe. Certainly, the early films suggest that. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess it'd be interesting to hear your view on Kalatozov overall, but what you think about this theory of mine that the forest fire is meant to represent this sort of burning of the soul.
I never actually thought about it that way. I think I just generally have, unless it's more overt, I often just have more straight readings. And I think Stalinists generally had more straight readings as well. So I'm not sure if, like with the socialist realism and everything, I'm not sure if Kolotosov had that in mind. It's possible.
The Cranes Are Flying is very sentimental.
It's true. You're very true. Yeah. I mean, that's why I actually never really thought of Kolotosov. I mean, maybe he changed his mind along the years. Obviously, Stalin was dead at this point. You never know. You also don't know if, like, Nail in the Boot is so over the top in its propaganda that it almost feels like it's purposefully over the top, as if it's mocking it. Like, it's just so ridiculous. It's just... it's a full force of shame around Nail in the Boot. Like, who produced this shoe? Like, who produced the bad material? The shame of the pub. Like, it's just so ridiculous, over the top, and stuff like that. I never know exactly how to read that film. I actually think it's great, but largely just because it's ridiculous and it's visually stunning. It foreshadows like what Kalatsa would do later. But then he's so hard to read, and I haven't read any biographies or anything in depth about him. I mean, I think it's interesting that he's also the guy they chose to do, like, his final film was The Red Tent, which was this huge blockbuster international production of the few like early international co-productions, a bit like Sean Connery and Peter Finch. Ennio Morricone did the score, though the version I watched was the version that didn't have the Morricone score, which is probably why I didn't like The Red Tent that much. I need to see another cut of it. There's so many cuts apparently of that film going around too. We're digressing a lot here, but
it's good. It's good to digress. I've seen The Red Tent as well. It's in case anyone wants to know about that, the Red Tent is essentially a load of polar explorers are stranded and they're going to have to survive in this red tent. So it's been a while since I've watched it, but I remember really enjoying that one.
I remember it just being such a mixed bag. There's some amazing shots in it. Like, I remember these balloons ripping apart and flowing away, and so much greatness there. But it felt like it was like a bastardized cut. But then again, I saw a cut. Like, there's so many cuts of it, so I don't know if you saw the same cut as well. So it might be one of those things that depends on which version you're seeing of it. I know I need to seek out the version that's scored by Ennio Morricone and see if... I think it's like 20 minutes difference between them as well, so like, what's happening there?
The one I saw had Ennio Morricone's score, yeah.
I read after I saw the version I did that the Morricone version is meant best. So yeah, that's probably why. But then to get back to this film and whether or not this fire is symbolic of this burning passion, I'm not completely sure. I mean, the lead is not involved in the if you count Sabinin as the lead, which he essentially is. He's the person writing the letter. He's the one narrating. He's the one getting most of the focus. And he's not involved in the love triangle, interestingly enough. So I don't fully know. I'm not fully on board with that, but I mean, it could genuinely be. So I'm not gonna write it off. But now I see for me, when I watched this film, this was my third viewing, and it's gotten better on every turn. I really get caught up in the here and now of the fire. I get caught up in the fear of it and just the awe as well. Like, a little bit attached, I guess, but just the awe of how it was done. This viewing, though, because I watched it like probably well over a decade ago the first time, and then when I rewatched it for the Mikhail Kolotosov episode, I was probably just waiting for the fire. So the first 30-40 minutes kind of like becomes a bit prolonged. This time, rewatching it, knowing when it's coming, I was really loving the first 40 minutes as well. The build up, the love triangle we're talking about. There's some amazing scenes and camera movements. I'm just as impressed by this as by The Flames, to be honest. There's this scene where you have the characters just running in jubilation through the forest with all of the branches hitting them, etc. And the camera follows them for probably like the 30 seconds to 60 second, maybe a 90-second long take, just follows them through. How did he manage to carry? Because this is 1960s, remember? I mean, I know that Sergei Rezevsky, who was the cinematographer, one of the best cinematographers of all time, by the way, in my opinion. I know, like, he pioneered handheld for these sort of films. Like, he started with Cranes Are Flying, also with Kalatosov, and they really managed to do some amazing things with handheld. But just the fact that they're able to just carry this big-ass camera through this forest to follow them in all this running, and all of these various takes throughout the movement of it, the way it can flip around, the way we're going through very heavily vegetated areas as well. Like, I just absolutely love it. And I think that, I mean, it foreshadows the fire because you have these really interesting scenes where you have Sabinin writing the letters to his wife, and he's writing them in front of the fire. And then as he's talking about what's happened, you zoom into the fire, and fire are enveloping them as, you know, the acts are being shown as well. So that's like, you kind of get, without knowing what's going to happen, you kind of get that the fiery image from very early. I feel this is so successful in terms of survival or adventure or disaster film. You have these open characters. They're simple, but you also get so much out of them. Like, it's almost like a silent movie in a lot of ways. Same with the Cranes Are Flying. Like, you can read a lot into them, but you have one guy, he's the expedition leader, he's writing to his wife, and then you have a love triangle. That's kind of like the base of it. And they're looking for diamonds to supply the entire industry, essentially, of USSR. But just from these simple motivations and from the dynamics, he really manages to build escalating tension, and you can feel the tension. You can feel the sweat as they're digging. You can feel this kind of unnerved tension. You can feel how Tanya is starting to get scared or worried about Sergei, the guy who's this crush on her as well. Like, you can really feel all of this building up before the fire just unleashes a complete disaster. And obviously, there's a.
It sounds like you're coming round to my
almost I
interpretation.
noticed that I was speaking, indeed.
I do think it's an amazing film. Like, I think if it had been released properly into international festivals, I think one of the things that it would have won for would have been cinematography. As you say, Urzevsky is one of the great cinematographers, and it really comes through here. You mentioned as well these letters that Sabnin was writing. Sort of worth pointing out that that's where the title of the film comes from. It's a slightly... I've always found it a slightly strange title. I don't know what you think, Chris. The Letter Never Sent. How key is this letter to the actual film? You know, they could have called it Siberian Inferno or something like that.
Yeah, it's true. They could even have called it Towering Inferno. They could have gone with any kind of big title. I mean, I think they probably were aiming for like a B-movie feel with the title, I guess. They wanted it to be a bit more poetical. The letter does frame it, even during the fire, because they're stuck in the fire for days. And the letter still continues, like, with a few notes here and there. So I think that, you know, the letter kind of guides you through it. And I guess it also, like, the fact that it says never sent, kind of gives the film a bit of a hopeless feeling too. Like, are everyone going to die? So it's a bit more melancholic, and you wonder about this letter. I think that's probably the idea behind it. But yeah, no, they could have just said Siberia on fire, Siberian Inferno, Lost in Siberia, any kind of explosive title. It might have got more views that way as well. Like, it might have been caught up earlier if lots of people were coming and thinking they were going to watch the biggest disaster movie the USSR ever produced. Instead of that, I don't even remember the name, but I mean, they did that airport knockoff in the 70s or early 80s. I don't remember its name, but that was a pretty big deal. Some people are watching that. I didn't like it. But yeah, no, they could have done it like that. But I think that, like, this has everything. Like, it has everything even for genre people. Like, this is a very tense film. Like, this is an action-driven adventure film with a lot of drama and a lot of high tension. Like, this is not Tarkovsky. Like, it looks like Tarkovsky. I think I mentioned in the previous episode we did on this that the cinematography in this and the Cranes Are Flying, like, this must have served some kind of inspiration for Ivan's childhood. That's the only real comparison, because they're so ahead of their time, these films, in terms of just the movement. If it had been released properly, like you said, yeah, definitely been picked up more, definitely gotten some awards. I'm glad it's been rediscovered. Hopefully it will get more and more and more rediscovered, because this is just one of these films, like, better and better every time I watch it. The tension still stays there, the action still stays there, and it just looks so damn gorgeous. I don't think there's any. This may be exaggerated. Like outside of like some silent films, I don't think there's any proper disaster or survival films that are shot as well as this. I just can't think of any. For adventures, maybe if you count Lord Arabia or something like that, but like this can counter it, honestly, in terms of cinematography, just that lush and beautiful. So if anything resounding is we're saying here hits on some notes you're interested in, just do please check this out. It genuinely is like at this point I would just say it's one of the best films of all time, to be honest. It climbed every time I've seen it. So yeah, I couldn't recommend this film more.
Can you imagine if this was remade, Chris? You see CGI flames and they're all working for a company rather than the country.
Of course, yeah. No, I mean, I'm surprised it hasn't. I'm shocked it hasn't. Maybe, like this could easily be. I mean, it could still be good. Like Sorcerer to Wages of Fair. Like I know lots of people prefer Sorcerer to Wages of Fair. They could probably do it. Like it's a similar kind of thing. I don't think it ever be anywhere near as good, especially now with CGI. Like you said, it would be this really bland thing.
I think one of the things that I like most about it is that there is this sort of, even I mentioned this unrequited love and this sort of love triangle that I find quite powerful. But even with that, there's an immense esprit de corps amongst these geologists, because they were working together for a shared purpose. We're taking part in this huge national journey. Obviously, we sort of know that a lot of horrendous things happened in the Stalinist era. Definitely wouldn't want any things like that again. But I think there was a sense, that they were working for something bigger than themselves that can be quite inspiring.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, this kind of messaging is also like if you look at the space race in the US managed to have a similar sense of shared purpose as well. I mean, this film actually does tie in a little bit with the space race too, the same sense of purpose. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right there as well. And the group dynamics are very strong. That is to it, the film's part of the film's power, as well as they care about each other. And obviously, there is a lot of severe danger, and I don't want to spoil it too much, as we already have an episode where we did spoil the ending with the spoiler warning, so you can go back and you can watch that if you want more in depth. But I think with that we can go on to the next winner of the poll, which is, I'm going to try to say the French title, Les Dimanches de Ville de Ray, or in English, Sundays and Cybele. And this is another one of those cases where actually it's an opposite case. This was a case where it's been on a strange journey, strange title, where it's actually first acclaimed as a masterpiece. It won Best Foreign Film at the Academy Awards, but has since drifted into obscurity. And I think the reason for that is probably due to the director, Serge Brignon, essentially being given a bit of a carte blanche. Like, you did so amazing with this film. Like, come do films in the English language, do these big budget films. And he just had a series of flops, ended up being fired off a huge, I think was it American or British film as well, where they just reshot everything because they thought he just completely screwed it up. And he then just drifted away. So this was kind of like his cinematic debut, and it was a magnum opus as well, and it's the only thing he's really remembered for. I think just because of that, because there's no other ways to kind of be called back to this film, and perhaps also because the thematics of the film changed a little bit as time changed and concerns changed. It kind of just get pushed out of the conversation. But similarly to Learn Never Sent, this is just an absolutely visually stunning film. It makes sense. It's shot by, again, one of the great cinematographers of all time, Henry Dacquet, who was Melville's regular cinematographer. I'm going to talk a little bit more about him and his work here later. But the plot is very unusual. It's a tale of a connection between a mentally ill war veteran suffering from amnesia, quite possibly PTSD, and there's a string of other issues, and a young 12-year-old girl. It plays in some ways, it could be read as an unsettling love story or some kind of risk to the young girl. The film is kind of asking us if he is a danger or if he's just genuinely innocent and he thinks like a child. And I think it's interesting that the film starts off portraying him as a danger, but then softens up to him as it goes along, while meanwhile society starts to look at him with more and more suspicion and fear, even a bit of dread there towards the end. What's your thoughts about Sundays and Cybele, Matt?
So I think there's a lot to unpack with this movie. I think you're absolutely right that attitudes have moved on such that people are incredibly paranoid about what adults that are non-family members may get up to with children. So I think it is a film that might make people sit uncomfortably in their seat these days. I was sort of going up and down on my own feelings about the movie during it. But I do think, like, I actually did a fair amount of medical research when I wrote up a review on this one, because I think it's pertinent. So the film doesn't really talk about the medical side of what's happened to Pierre, the adult man in the movie. So he essentially was in the war in Indochina, the Vietnam War before the American Vietnam War. He essentially strafes a village and realizes when he's strafing the village that he's just shot a young girl. And I think when I looked into, what does that do? So he does seem to have quite bad retrograde amnesia, and I think you mentioned PTSD. So one of the things that can happen with PTSD is age regression. So it can literally cause you to feel like you're younger. And I think when you're aware of that, and that's not something that the movie does make people aware of, it becomes a lot more sympathetic. If he sees himself as a 14-year-old boy, then going around with a 12-year-old girl does look a bit more harmless. Having said that, you look at it and you think, is that a fairly contrived way to set this movie, and why was Bignon interested in making this movie? I'll just mention something. You said the title in French, Dimanche de Ville d'Arveil. Ville d'Avray, for anyone that doesn't know, is a suburb on the outskirts of Paris. So that's where this movie takes place. That the father has abandoned his daughter in this convent school. And because no one really has seen the father, he was very briefly present on the first night that Françoise attends the school. It's possible for the teachers at that school to then mistake Pierre for actually being the father. As well, the name of the movie is Sundays and Cybele. It's kind of this strange thing because
Yeah, it's annoying. I agree.
it's kind of a spoiler in a title, and then it's also
Yeah.
So have I provoked some thoughts from you there, Chris?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm annoyed by the title because, like, a big part of the film's plot. I mean, it's not really a spoiler, but a big part of the plot is that the girl says, the nuns gave me the name Francois because I didn't have a Christian name. I have a Greek name. And Pierre asks her what it is, and she doesn't want to tell him, and she only tells him late in the film. So it's kind of like it should have been called Sundays and Francois, if anything.
Yeah.
It's just like, why are you telling us the name that's being revealed much later in the film? And she kind of teases around what it is. Like, I mean, it's not a big spoiler, but it's just like, it feels like a lazy job by whoever was promoting this abroad. It's really annoying. I also agree with you in terms of, like, the question of why was this shot, why was this film, what was the idea of it? Because the first time I saw this film, I was very, very uncomfortable by it, and I didn't love it at all. I still thought it was visually stunning, and I liked it, but essentially throughout this film, it kind of starts with Pierre, and you wonder about it, because he follows him. He literally stalks the father and the girl to the point that he scares the father off. The father runs away because he sees this guy lurking around, and he's acting really weird, and he's asking weird questions. You get that something is wrong with Pierre that we don't quite know yet, but even we, like, when we're watching this, at least me, you see him as some kind of danger, and then once he starts hanging out with Cybele because he wants to, the father essentially runs away from Pierre so fast because he's scared of him that he leaves his suitcase, and Pierre finds a letter to Francois or Cybele, and he wants to give it to her, and he feels sorry for her. That's kind of how the connection starts. But at least from a modern perspective, there's so much uncomfortable because Francois consistently, Pierre doesn't represent it, but Francois consistently talks about how when she becomes 18, she wants to marry him. She kind of talks as if they're dating. She's jealous of Pierre's girlfriend, who is a nurse, who kind of treated him through the illness and has really taken on almost like a mother role for him. And she's really jealous, and she's asking, like, she thinks it's a reason for the girlfriend to be jealous of her. The way that Francois talks is as if they are in a romantic relationship. And again, she's a 12-year-old girl, he's a 30-year-old man. There's like all kinds of pedophilia associations there, and Pierre is there going along with it. And like one of the readings and one of the reasons I was really put off the first time is that it can be read as like a pedophile fantasy. You have this nice adult who's not doing anything wrong and the girl love it kind of thing. Like that's the way the film can be read, and that's really, really, really uncomfortable. And I think I even had a moral with it. As you know, Matt, because we discussed it a few times, I don't really view films morally anymore. So even if Bertrand had those kinds of thoughts, it's not going to affect how I feel about the film anymore. So I kind of like that. That's part of the unsettling atmosphere that's there that could be read into it. Though I did read that actually at the time, the pedophilia conversation wasn't developed at all. Like Patricia Gotzi said that at the time, that none of them, including Father, never even thought. Like, had never even had the thought in their head that there could be pedophilia involved, even with the script, even with everything. Like, it never even crossed their mind. That's how different the time was back then. So maybe it didn't even cross the mind of the director or writer. Who knows? What I can say for me is that the unsettling atmosphere of, is he a danger? Could he flip? Like, one of the fears that people are realizing this is, he killed a young girl before. He's admitted killing a young girl in the war. Could he kill again? Could he flip?
It's interesting from the way you're talking about the film, because I agree, there's a sense that maybe he's going to be a danger to her, but I actually felt it the other way round as well, that they were both a danger to one another, really. One of the things that she asks him to do is to climb the local church and fetch the golden cockerel off of the top of the church, which I'm sure everyone would realise is not particularly safe. So it's one of these movies where, yes, it seems that both of them desperately need someone. Francoise has been abandoned several times, and Pierre is suffering from severe trauma, and they do really need someone. And I think it's interesting as well when we talk about how problematic is the relationship, because I think particularly in France, people have traditionally been a lot more relaxed about these sorts of things. I even remember there's a song called Lemon Incest by Surgeon Charlotte Gainsbourg, and the song is about the fact that they'd really like to sleep together, but that it's taboo, and that can be released in France and be a hit, and
I mean, we talked about this. Like, I remember we pressed Clem about like what's going on in France, because like in Claire's knee, they literally have like two people in their 30s, 40s, and the friend, she's kind of pushing her buddy to like, hey, like, why don't you date this 15-year-old girl? Like, why don't you try? I mean, I actually do think, I don't remember what the age of consent is.
There's an interesting anecdote here that there was a big scandal in the UK when a teacher ran off with his pupil, and the issue happened that they ran away to France, but essentially their relationship wasn't illegal in France. In the UK, for example, the age of consent is very high. If you're a teacher, for example, there'll be a special age of consent. I think it goes up to something like 21, if I remember. But, there are various people who just think love is love. If there's two people that are enjoying each other's company, then just leave them alone, and they will apply that to any scenario, and very extreme scenarios that can be applied to. But I think it's interesting. I just wanted to relate a sort of anecdote, because I've got a family member who's a teacher, and they have to have training about this sort of stuff for obvious reasons. And one of the things that they're told is that youngsters are often trying to simulate relationships rather than actually wanting a full-on like sexual relationship with an adult. It's almost like they're preparing for that in later life, so they'll do some sort of simulation. And like, if you bring to mind an idea of a child that's been given a dolly, no one's suggesting that child should be bringing up another child, but there's often a fascination with it. One day I might have a child of my own, and I'm sort of getting used to the idea of holding a baby or something like that. So I think it's a fascinating movie, because There are various people in the movie who they'll look at this relationship and they'll be like, that's absolutely terrifying. And then one of Pierre's friends is this very intriguing artist character who absolutely couldn't care less what the law was and would just be, oh, let's just, two people like each other, just leave them alone. And then actually Pierre's girlfriend she actually ends up stalking them in the end. So Pierre wasn't the only one in the movie doing any stalking. She ends up stalking them without intervening because she wants to see if she feels that what's going on is healthy. And so I mean, I do think the film's very interesting because it allows you to try and process all these feelings and thoughts. We haven't talked a lot about the technical side. You mentioned that you really like the visuals, but for me the sound that comes in and this occasional ability to create a dreamlike atmosphere is really valuable. There are a lot of things to like about this movie and a lot of food for thought. And a lot of people would be queasy watching this movie in 2024.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I was too. I mean, in fact, or maybe like I think one of the things, like when I first watched it was probably 10 years ago, probably. I think that there's been a bit of a counter reaction as well, in the sense that back in the 2010s, I think I was very, very, very concerned about pedophilia. There was this sense that especially any adult man who was not with a family member was immediately seen as a pedophile or a severe risk. And I think that there's been a counter reaction to that. Maybe not in all countries, but kind of like this, you shouldn't be suspicious of people just because they love children or want to be around children or care for children. Like back in the day, like it was very normal for a young child to become friends with the old man or the old woman or the old couple living across the street, for instance, and go over and hang out. Like that would be pretty normal.
I don't know what this is like in every country, but in primary schools in the UK, the vast majority of teachers are women for the reasons that you're just mentioning. And essentially it was a job that I had a lot of interest in doing. When I was at university, I had thought about it, but I looked into it and felt very disconcerting in that time. I don't know if this is the case now, that a lot of schools would treat male and female children very differently. So when you have young children, they will often sort of have accidents, toilet accidents. They then need to have their clothing changed, and as a man, you wouldn't be allowed to do that. It would be a task given to women to do. And so I would say it kind of affected my life in a strange way, because I would have actually liked to do that job. But then when I looked at it, and I'm an unmarried man, and I just knew that there would be that assumption that there was something wrong about me because I wanted to do that job. So I do think it's very interesting to talk about these issues, and I think you're probably right that the level of overreaction was probably quite damaging, albeit it's an incredibly serious issue.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and I looked up, by the way, the age of consent in France is 15, though until 2021, it was not considered rape if an adult had sex with someone under the age of 15, unless there was force involved. So essentially, I don't know what the law was previously, but apparently it was not considered rape, though it was illegal. So France can be a bit of a slightly strange place sometimes in terms of sex.
We love France generally. Yeah,
we love France. Sorry, French people listening to this episode. I know there are quite a few. We are not judging you. So, like I said, the first time I saw this film, like I couldn't get the pedophile angle out of my head. This time I was able to. Like I didn't end up seeing it as pedophilia. I thought there was possibility of it. I thought it could be seen as it. There's unsettling things about it, but that was not really my reading of it. I don't think Pierre was intended to be a pedophile in the film. So I read it differently than I did before. I mean, I wasn't sure he was meant to be a pedophile previously either, to be clear. But like, I thought it was much easier to read that into it. Then I think that, as you mentioned, with children play acting and etc., like I just also remembered back to my own childhood, like how I would say that I would want to marry XYZ adult. Like I think that's a very normal thing for children to say, oh, I want to marry that person, I want to marry that person. It's so one of those things that a lot of children say as well. So it didn't seem as egregious to me this time, but yeah, there's all of these more queasy things, and it's probably part of why it is not as big as it once was, and why even getting it rediscovered might be a bit of an issue. But I did say I want to speak a little bit more about Henry Duckey and the cinematography here. And like, you're absolutely right, the sound is excellent too. This is really one of the best made films of France from this time. Like, put this film next to Breathless, 400 Blows, Fear from 5 to 7, Last Year at Marienbad, all of these films, and it's pretty much on the same level. It genuinely is, in terms of just movements, visuals, lighting. It's just absolutely stunning. In fact, I would probably, in terms of visuals, I would put it above 400 Blows and Breathless. I think it's just so well polished, every part of it, the way it moves. It has a much softer lighting than Let It Never Send. It's Let It Never Send is obviously very dramatic, a lot of silhouettes, etc. This is much softer and gentler, but it still has a very fluid camera movement where the camera can go almost everywhere it wants. It's very simple. Like, a lot of the scenes are just Pierre and Francois walking in the park, but the way the camera just moves along with them, follows their feet, moves up, the kind of gentle, slightly longer takes as well. It's all just flows together. It looks beautiful. It moves beautiful. It's even some really ingenious, again, can compare with Colotus over there. Like, you have this shot, for instance, where Pierre looks through a wine glass and kind of spins it around and you see through it. There's so much beautiful creativity with how this film is shot and feels, even for what it's shot in a small city. There's not very few like extreme things that happens. It's just a gentle drama comparable to, say, a Romer. But the camera work just feels so alive and elegant and playful. And like you said, the soundscape also plays in. You also have the characters blending in, and like they're well written. It's a proper character drama. And I think this is one of the cases where you see that intersection I mentioned earlier, where you kind of have like the camera work and artistry for us more on the art house side of things, but you have these, this deep, strong human connection and internal drama that so many others can connect to. It really just has everything, even though the thematics can be off-putting or difficult for many.
I think it's interesting you describing the film as an art house movie. Like, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think this is the type of movie you see in an art.
I'm not really calling it an art house movie, to be clear. I'm just saying that it has that for us.
Yeah.
Like, it has. Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to put this in the context of the wider ICM 500 Less Than 400 project, in that I think in terms of the tonality you get from the type of movies that are in the project, it's a very diverse project, but you will see quite a lot of movies from the 60s that are shot in black and white and are kind of on the way to art house vibe, but generally that they wouldn't be extremely dense puzzle box films. It's not the Cremaster cycle, right? I just wanted to mention a connection that we have to another film that we'll be talking about in a while. Is Patricia Gozzi. So she's a very young actress in this movie, and she will reappear when we talk about the movie Rapture. And I think it's no surprise that 2 of the 6 movies are Patricia Gozzi movies, because she is this electric youngster that really eats up the screen. And it's a strange story with her, because she just decided that she didn't want to carry on acting, so she had a relatively short career to what she could have. And it's interesting to me to think about, if she'd have decided that she wanted to stay in the movies, she'd probably be this absolutely huge name by now and everyone would know who we were talking about. But hopefully one of the things that people get out of this podcast is rediscovering people like Patricia Gozzi, who absolutely deserve to be rediscovered.
Yeah, I could not agree more, and we'll talk a lot more about her a little later. But another thing that kind of goes through this film, I think you're absolutely right, but especially from these winners, I think that art house is probably going too far, but art house adjacent. I mean, this is not, Godard. You're not going to get Godard on top. The winners in this are generally like A24 adjacent, I'd say. Like, if A24 was around in the 1960s, this is probably kind of like the stuff they'd be happy to distribute or produce. It's author films. It's visually interesting films generally that also has a lot of character, a lot of depth to them. And broad appeal to cinephiles, but not like the most mainstream thing. Like they're not Hollywood blockbuster or Hollywood dramas. They have that more transcendent, more altruistic, more artistic element to them. Absolutely. The next winner is slight outlier. Actually, it's a huge outlier because you mentioned that they tend to be the 60s. And in fact, 5 out of the 6 winners we're talking about today were made in the 60s. This is the only film that was made in the 80s. So our third winner is Kohei Oguri's 1981 black and white drama Muddy River, which is set in the mid-50s with the shadows of World War II still looming on the edges, especially in the thoughts of the adults. However, the main focus here is on a young boy who makes a friend living on a houseboat. And unlike the other 2 previous winners, this is not an overtly visual film. At least I wouldn't say so. Like, this is not one of those films that are showy. It's a far more subdued drama. In many ways, in terms of direction and shooting and composition, feeling a lot like the social dramas of the 1950s. Like, if you told me that it was shot in the 50s, there you might actually believe it.
A lot of people have commented on that. There's a pro article that I read sort of preparing for this podcast where they've said, it actually looks like it was made in the 1960s. And I think it's shot in black and white as well, right? Which doesn't make it feel like it's an 80s release. I had wondered initially, was this a movie that was shot way back when, but then for some reason remained unreleased and they released it later. So, although it is an 80s movie, I do think it sits quite well in company with the other movies that we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like the same time period. I mean, it's set a few years before, like the glory era of what our voters seem to love. But yeah, no, it really, really feels like it's there. I mean, it wasn't rediscovered from what I can tell. Like, this was the debut of the director. He made another film 3 years later and consistently made films every 5-6 years, or it started becoming a decade after a while. But yeah, no, I mean, it really feels like it could have been unearthed from the 50s or 60s. You're absolutely right.
To kind of contextualize that, the defeat in World War II was, something that looms large over this movie. I think the adult male characters in this movie are veterans from that war, and it feels like, maybe the script had been written at the time, and it took a long time for the script to get noticed and picked up.
Oh, it's based on a book. I can look up the release date.
And it absolutely feels like that. So I'll briefly just describe what the film's about. So it's set in Osaka. It's set on a riverside, and it's about 2 families. There's one family of a mum and a dad and a child where they're running a tiny riverside in, which is the Muddy River of the title. And then essentially a riverboat arrives on the other side of the river containing a second family, and that family is a little bit more troubled without trying to give too much away. And I think really the substance of the movie is about the interactions between those 2 families. It's about the personal trauma of the family on the houseboat, but I think it's also about this trauma from the Second World War, which is unresolved. There's a part in the movie where the guy that runs the noodle shop sees a newspaper that says that the post-war period is over, and you can see that he doesn't want the post-war period to be over. There's a lot of unresolved feelings about the defeat that Japan suffered. So it's a movie that has an incredible texture to it.
So first of all, I looked up the author. The novel is by Teru Miyamoto, and the novel is actually written in 1977, so just 4 years before this. So it's definitely not rediscovered, though it might be autobiographical or partially inspired by. That's just a guess. Like, I mean, he lived through the periods. He might have taken some thoughts. He's still alive as well, the author. So this is not like an old man, but it would have been someone who would have been young at that period. Yeah, so Muddy River is a very, very good drama. It makes sense that it's a literally adaptation because it moves a bit that way. It's a bit meaty in terms of characters and movements, and it also follows the characters rather than anything else. Like you have the boy meeting the other boy, connecting with the family. You have this some extra in-depth kind of exposition of his own parents might have come from, and you kind of have these things like you can see, okay, this might have been a chapter in that novel, etc. It's not quite what I tend to absolutely love. I think it's a great movie, but it's possibly my least favorite of the 6 winners, just because it's not an overly visual film. I tend to be drawn to very, very visual films, and I thought that it didn't have it's definitely very textually rich. So it has a lot of things going on in the underbelly. There's a lot of things tying into various prejudices. We didn't mention that it is revealed very early in the film that the mother of the boy he befriends is a sex worker, and there's a lot of thoughts about that as well. And I think it's a very human film. I think it's probably one of the things that really connected our voters with the film is that these kids are very flawed. They're all hurt. All of the people in the story, parents, everyone, no matter how nice it is, all of them are complex. All of them have layers. Relationships are also strained and often difficult. But there's just a lot of moments of this humanity where people will make specific decisions that might go contrary to popular morality at the time, of how accepting they might be of other people, etc. And I think that hits well. I think it's very well structured. I think the characters are believable. I'm drawn in, exactly like one of those great social dramas of the 50s and 60s. So yeah, I think it's just a very strong, great film, but it doesn't have that X factor that tends to make me a big fan and will be shouting it from the rooftops. But yeah, it clearly has the appeal to just bring in a lot of fans.
I mean, I think it's a really interesting film because there's even side plots that I find really intriguing. Like,
yeah, me too.
The guy who runs the noodle shop, for example, clearly has a very rich history, and the father of the houseboat who we never meet, he's passed away. There's a lot of talk about him as well. It's just a film that's very evocative. I did have problems with it. I'm very sensitive to watching films that are about sort of trying to wash away things that happen and are trying to project some sort of soft power, which often very good propaganda movies can do. In this movie, for example, they're singing of war songs, and some of the war songs are really cringy. If we watched a German movie like this and people were singing the Horst Wessel song, everyone would be super put off by that. But I think because maybe in the West it's not as well known, the sort of Japanese part in the Second World War, that maybe we're not as sensitive to it. One of the songs is about handing out just desserts to the enemy in Manchuria. And the war in Manchuria was a war of aggression from Japan, and they are singing about genocide. It's literally genocide. So I found that incredibly problematic. Although there are other movies where I felt like this. Four Steps in the Clouds, I know, is a movie that you really like and many people actually love. And it's exceptionally clear to me that what I'm watching is fascist propaganda when I watch that. But, other people don't necessarily think of that. And I think the other thing, I always try and flag if there's some animal cruelty in a movie. There is a part in this movie where some animals are set on fire, and it's not special effects. It actually happens. So I think both of those two things were very problematic to me about this movie. But on a sort of technical level, I think it's incredibly well put together. And there are things I absolutely love about this. When I was watching this film, I think after about 20 minutes, I felt this movie is going to be one of the top 10 movies that I've ever seen. I'm really feeling it. And then there's some of those somatic elements came in that perturbed me and made me think that I was being manipulated by the film.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, or two great points. And I think it's interesting that this film, I forgot to mention earlier, it was actually nominated for foreign film in 1992 at the Academy Awards. And America is obviously the Western country with the most direct experience and animosity with Japan. So that is a bit interesting in terms of the messaging you mentioned. Though I also think that I don't know why exactly Japan gets a big pass. It might be because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that many people feel like they kind of turned the script in terms of victim and perpetrator and made things a bit more complex. But yes, I mean, Manchuria, it's a more fair question. It's essentially they wanted a colony, and they did some absolutely horrible thing there just because they wanted to. And yes, I mean, I didn't actually think of the war songs that way, but you're absolutely right. I thought it was more about just the melancholia of what happened. I didn't even think it was necessarily the loss that they were lamenting, but just deaths of people. That might be a much more kinder reading than you.
It was the occasional lyric that was quite explicit. I do agree with you that the major tonality is about regretting loss of comrades, but there's the occasional line and phrase where I was like, oh, wow, that's really inappropriate. And also, I mean, I think you're right in terms of people turn narratives in their head like this, there has to be a victim and perpetrator. Of course, war is very complicated, and, there can be perpetrator and perpetrator. There was similar things happen in the European theatre. Till this day, people are still sort of rightly angry about the firestorms that were deliberately created in Dresden and Mannheim. And I don't think there's any arithmetic to these things. You can be very upset about Dresden and Mannheim, about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You can be upset about those, and that's perfectly legitimate, but it doesn't sort of wipe away other things or balance some scales.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think, though, that a lot of people will be absolutely fine with this movie. If you're sensitive about certain issues like I am, it will knock it out. But like I say, I took a similar reading of Four Steps in the Clouds, and it's very rare that someone agrees with me on that one. So I guess it's just flagging that there are these two issues in the movie, and if you feel that you'll be sensitive to them, maybe watch one of these others.
No, I absolutely think that's good to mention. And I mean, that scene of animal cruelty in the film made me uncomfortable a bit as well, because like I was thinking about it because we've been talking about it a little bit as well. Seeing it a little bit through your eyes, I was thinking, okay, this film is communicating that the person doing this is in inner turmoil, but is doing something like this to animals, and is showing it as a horrible thing. But then you step outside as the viewer and you think, okay, but what made the filmmakers want to do that and visually show it like that, because they are actually doing it. So there's
exactly, it's incredibly realistic in the sense that a child who has gone through a lot of trauma would do something like this. It is a very psychologically accurate trauma response. I think, like we discussed with Sunday and Cybele, your mind does go to, yeah, but why was the director attracted to the material, or why did they make that creative decision when they could have done other things?
Yes, and I mean, they could have done the exact same scene just without showing it, or showing part of it, but doing it in a different way. So a lot of power is done when you don't see something. You could have seen him light the fire, and then you see the reflection of flames, for instance. You didn't have to actually see.
You could do something like that happened a lot. Someone put a cat in a bag and throw the bag into the river, and can just pretend that there's a cat in there. You
Yes, as you pretend that the person falling from the building is not a dummy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh well. Anyways, I think that's we can move on to our fourth winner. Hopefully, people are still interested in seeing whether if these things that we brought up now doesn't turn you off, because those are some flags that probably should be highlighted. So yeah, do seek up Mother River if those flags are not nerving. And I can also actually bring up that even with Four Steps of the Cloud, I see your point on that film, and I think I just said that I'm happy to watch propaganda films with unsavory elements if other parts of it are good and I can still enjoy it. I mean, I think The Fountainhead is a great film.
I love The Fountainhead. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
I'm not a Randian at all, but I absolutely love the movie The Fountainhead. Go.
I think The Fountainhead is actually one of those rare cases where the extreme right gets as visually aesthetically creative as the extreme left, because I think The Fountainhead could be put next to Nail in the Boot, and those could have some really nice dynamics together hanging out.
That would be a cracking double bill. I would say as well that I think with the remaining films that we're going to talk about, I don't think any of them are problematic. I think probably coming up some incredible movies. The last three movies are all on my top movies list, and I'm really excited to talk about them, to be honest.
Brilliant, yeah. And the next one is one of my absolute favorites as well, because our fourth winner, Carriage to Vienna, has for many of our regular listeners become synonymous with this project because it topped the list more than any other film. In fact, it topped the list 6 times in a row after it hit that top spot. Only ineligibility could stop it, and I think that the fact it was on top, we got so much buzz for it. It's the reason why it managed to break through, because that Blu-ray release you mentioned, great looking release, that didn't come out until a few years after it. Very happy managed to push this film in such a way. One thing I know the most about Carriage to Vienna is just its unnerving hyper focus just on the journey itself. I mean, pretty much everything else is cut away. It could easily have been like a 2.5-hour film, showing the turmoil of World War II, setting up our protagonist's life with her husband, only to then have it snatched away when the Nazis kill him. And then there's 2 soldiers knocking on her door, commandeering her horses, her carriage, and just forcing her to take them to safety, take them out of the war zone, take them to Vienna. And instead, it's 80-minute long film, approximately. And this entire backstory I just said is just a title card rolling up as the sound of the carriage comes on, and we see images of just trees passing by. It's an incredibly powerful film. It's an incredibly insular film as well. It's driven by the characters, by visual tension, by the widow, the stone face, and you can read her bereavement, but you can also read how much she wants to hurt these men in the carriage with her. I mean, these are not the German soldiers that killed her husband. In fact, they don't know that her husband has just been killed. But without saying much, and acting as she understands nothing, she slowly starts acting out this plan of murder, and like you have the tension increasing. You have these pans under the carriage that reveal that there's an axe there. You have her plotting to remove weapon by weapon. Like you have this step-by-step approach. It's visually beautiful as well. It's so simple. You have so few characters. I mean, she's mute, and I think this is one of the best things about the film. She's mute. One of the German soldiers is severely wounded and barely talks. And you have this one soldier who's really friendly, really thankful, trying to put her mind at ease. And he's talking. In fact, the main language was German because he's the main conversationalist. He's, big to say, like, he's not German, he's Austrian, he hates the war, he just wants it to end. She doesn't understand what he's saying. She's plotting his murder. And I think while you feel her pain, it also flips the script a little bit, which is needed in the sense that you also feel for these soldiers, especially this one. And you start to worry about him, because I think that if it's just her and 2 stereotypical Nazis, it would not have the tension or the power it has. So yeah, a very, very, very big fan of this film.
I think it's very interesting, Chris, when you're talking about, you could have done a much longer version of this. I think you could. There's a Billy Wilder movie where you find out that the main character is a journalist, just very simply because he lights his match on the carriage return of the typewriter. And you just think he's done that a million times before. And you can do that instead of, 20 minutes of backstory. And I actually think one of the things about Carriage to Vienna that's really good is how lean it is and how it manages to establish so much so quickly so you can focus on the emotions. It's a taut movie because, like you say, you don't know what's going to happen at any moment. There could be violence with any second. And I think the title is quite evocative. Carriage to Vienna sounds like some sort of period movie, expecting to see.
Or it could also be a rom-com.
It brings to mind for me people in sort of white wigs and wearing frills and, a golden coach. Whereas the carriage that we're talking about here is a sort of forester's wagon.
Yeah, just in case there was any question there, I completely agree with you how lean this film is. It's a big part of the impact. I mean, I think you can make a great film without that leanness too. But I do think there's something very, very powerful in just being lean, being concise, getting to the point, thinking about Lifeboat at one point, the Alfred Hitchcock film, where you kind of like, boom, both sunk, this is the drama. And I think I like that way of just setting it up and getting into the action. And this entire film is just a carriage ride, really. there's elements that happen outside the carriage, and I don't want to spoil anything, but the film really it is this ride, it is this being stuck essentially in the forest, following a very narrow route. And once again, you have this like really evocative atmosphere. The cinematography is great. You have this kind of fog or mist. You have the trees around them almost becoming like prison bars. Like that's probably not quite what they're going to be. They're walled in. Like they can usually go one way. Sometimes there's a choice, but it feels because of how forced you are to be in this carriage and how close the spaces around them. It feels like a bit of like what we discussed a few times, like we had a full episode about it, like Who is Close, like single location films. Like it almost just feels like you're stuck in one place, even though the scenery changes. It's so similar. And you have so few characters. You have the clear visual indicator that is coming. Murder is coming. You have a plot. You have a plan. It's so effective. And I think it's one of the reasons why people connect to this film and react to this film, because it's an Eastern European war film, so it's not, I wouldn't call it directly Hitchcockian, but like just this directness of it, the visual cues of it, how it doesn't waste time, how relentless. In some ways, it's even like brings it back to Letter Never Sent as well. The forest isn't on fire, but you do have this desperate, deadly journey, just traveling through woods. And
Yeah. So sorry to interrupt you. I just think like this point about the woods and the atmosphere, I think is and the mist, I think is absolutely right. That it feels like they're getting nowhere because the sort of forests in Central Europe just go on forever.
It really is this trip to nowhere almost, like doom is in the air. And I think this is one of those reasons why Eastern Bloc war films, more so than American or British war films very often, has become so popular on the forum. Like obviously they were behind Iron Curtain when it come out, but they hit a note because like when you see American war films from this era, and there are obviously a lot of USSR propaganda war films as well about the Great Patriotic War, and there's lots of brouhaha and friendship and familiarity, etc. Where it's just, oh wow, we're the best. We had all of these moments. I think that a lot of Eastern Bloc films has this melancholy because they experience, at least this is part of my theory, it might be wrong, but I think that the landmass Europe experienced so much more direct terror than America and Britain in terms of just, they were occupied, they were actively killed, death was in the air at all points in a very different way, and there's just this pure melancholy about war, this kind of almost existentialism in many of these films, where death is coming, almost everything's meaningless. Can there be any kind of love? Can there be any kind of life? And I think Carriage to Vienna kind of adds itself to that canon in some ways, in just how dread-inducing and dark it can be. And that might put some viewers off. I can also sell this as a really suspenseful ride with death that they're on in the corner, but that's definitely a part of how strong the film is.
I mean, I think when you say viewers might put, this is an incredibly accessible movie, and I think almost everyone would like this movie. You know, someone always hates any movie, but I think Carriage to Vienna is an immensely likable movie. This is the most unequivocal recommendation. It's not my favorite of these 6 movies that we're talking about, but I think it's, in terms of an investment of your time, it's not very long, and it is very accessible and well liked, and there's also access to it from second run, so I do recommend this one to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'll just say as well that this kind of feeling, this melancholy you talk about, it's still a thing. I was literally talking to a Lithuanian lady at a party last night in the UK, but she said, that there is this feeling that you will have these liberal periods, and then someone from the east or the west is going to come and steamroller over you. And it's a problem, particularly with geography. If you go from Central Europe up to Moscow, you have very flat land that has been historically easy for militaries to negotiate. And there is just this feeling of sadness that there will be a next conflict. And those conflicts never make anybody happy in the end. And I think Carriage to Vienna is about that, that violence is not a solution to anything in the end. I think it's really quite an emotional movie, and if we all connected to our feelings a bit more and learn to find similarity with different people, then we wouldn't have this sort of disastrous steamrolling over Eastern Europe every 50 years.
Very powerful point. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably a part of the fear too, because this is constant wars on in Central Europe. This area, there's frequent wars throughout history, and yes, it's very, very true. I think I would like to just bring this really quick point too, that Carriage is not a film that came out of nowhere. I would say that the director Karol Kaczina is one of the greatest director that the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, as he was working for pretty much all of his life, ever had. He is comparable in terms of the stature and scope and size of his filmography to Vera. Absolutely. I think that if you love this film, there's so many other films you might love from this director. I think The Air is a film I love even more. Released first 1970, but it was kind of just immediately blocked and censored and not released until the fall of the communist era. So that's just the highest recommendation I can bring. But he made so many strong and powerful war movies that kind of like warmed up for his film until he made Carriage to Vienna. Like, he made Long Live the Republic, he made like Praise, he made a lot of these films that are not quite as strong, but like if you love this film, you will love that. And then he kind of branched out into other things later until, getting censored so heavily for The Air that he ended up in TV for a long time, or like these much lower productions for a long time. But yeah, that's a name you definitely should try to remember and seek out more, because Kaczina in the 60s in particular, he was a true 34th.
So does that bring us to Rapture then?
Yeah, let's talk about Rapture, because our fifth winner has really meant a lot to this forum and influenced one of our most memorable and eternally beloved episodes from season 1, where we spoke to the director Don Gillerman's wife Mary, and she was in process of writing a book about her husband's life and his films. And we've talked about pretty much every single major film he made, from Rapture to King Kong and the Towering Inferno, and to a lot of pretty hidden gems that preceded Rapture. It kind of showed how Rapture came to be. Rapture is a very small niche film. It wasn't nominated for any awards, as far as I can tell. At least none are mentioned on IMDb. Gillerman was I would say like a mid-tier British director at the time. But they had done some great films. He got to work with a lot of big stars, but he wasn't quite seen as an auteur. And this is the film where he really released everything he could, and he poured his heart and soul in. And that's apparently how he felt as well. It's visually evocative and stunning. It's truly captivating. Like in terms of just visually engaging films from this period, it's up there with the best. And I'll talk about some of the most amazing scenes a little later. But just to give a quick overview of the story, we have a young girl who struggles with sensory overload and is kind of seen as not quite there by her family. Her sister has just got married. Her father has lost his wife. He's very strict. He seems to be, calling her mad, looking down on her, treating her as a bit almost like a captive servant in some way, or like a very young child. And she has nothing of herself. So she sets out to build a scarecrow, something of her own. And suddenly, the scarecrow seems to be coming to life, though not really. It's an escaped convict who may or may not have murdered a gendarme. This film takes place in France, and it's very open about that. It never makes any real, it never really tries to pretend that this is her scarecrow come to life, but to her, to this teenage girl, that's what he is, or at least that's what she tells him. He belongs to her. And that girl is once again played by the fabulous Patricia Gozzi. I think this performance allows her to go so many different places than Sundance and Cybele. And it's even more incredible that she did not actually know how to speak English when she was cast in this film. And she never, at least at that point, she didn't learn. She learned her lines phonetically and had to act it out without really fully understanding what she was saying. And her performance is still so spellbinding and incredible. And you can also feel the sensory overload that she's feeling and experiencing, and that makes it such a special viewing. And I struggle to really think of any similar films. So it's just a raw masterpiece. This is the third time I saw it as well, same as with Letter Never Sent. And each time it went up in my estimation once more. I'm so happy it topped our list. I'm so happy. Like the forum, I think in part just because of Patricia Gotzi being in Cybele, it kind of brought people to kind of check out what else she had done. And that led them to see this film that never really got that much fuss. And they started just building it up until most of us had seen it. And I don't remember hearing bad things about this film. Like every single person who seems to be discovering this film for the first time seems to fall in love with it, or at least like it. It just has that special character to it. And as Matt said early on, like these films, the next three films we're talking about, or now it's just two left, like they really have such broad appeal. Like that, I can't believe that this just flew under the rug and just keeps staying under the rug. It's an absolute tragedy.
Yes, I think this is an amazing film. I think you're right to characterize this as a beloved film of the forum. I think people do find this a very special film. It's based on a British novel that I actually have had a read of for this podcast, and it was released very ignominiously in Britain. It was the second half of a double bill with a very random cheesecakey sex comedy. So I think it's fair to say that the distributors had about zero confidence in this film. And also, very strangely, a young Dean Stockwell in this movie, people might remember him as Ziggy in Quantum Leap. I think that's probably might be what he's best known for, at least people from my generation. He actually really disliked the film.
Oh,
that's very damaging for a film if one of the lead actors comes out and says that they don't like it. Michael Caine famously was in one of the Jaws sequels and came out with this cutting line about the only purpose of being in it was to get himself another house. And Dean Stockwell had very cutting comments to make about this film. By the way, I think he's entirely wrong about it, and it's very sad as well because he's very, very good in this film. I do think it's interesting what you were saying about Agnes suffering when things get too stimulating, so she can't cope with this city, for example. When you read the novel, it's very clear what I mean, it's clear in the film as well. She gets excluded from school, and it's very clear that she's not normal in the novel. She talks a lot about not being normal, and I think in modern days, situation might be described as being autistic. However, it's very dangerous to pathologize people because, then they become a syndrome rather than a person. And she is an incredibly interesting character, and I think a lot of people that watch the movie will associate with her. If they come to an art house movie like this, they might be less normative. Might have felt that they never really fit in, and really Agnes doesn't fit in at all. The novel is actually a bit more spare, because you don't get all the characters. So, for example, Gunnel Lindblom, who plays Karen in this movie, but there's no character like that in the book. In fact, the father talks about the fact that when he wants to speak to Agnes, he never calls her name because there's nobody else there. If he shouts, she will know that he's shouting for her because it's just the two of them on the farm. And it's very interesting, the contrast, because I think Patricia Gotzi wouldn't have been able to exactly play the Agnes from the book in that she's quite slender, and it wouldn't be believable that she was her father's sort of sole slave, essentially. She does all the cooking, she does a lot of farm work. It's a much bigger farm in the book. The Scarecrow in the film is essentially put on a kitchen garden. And there are things about the movie that are much stronger, but the book is actually really good. The bit that the book maybe has a bit more of is it's able to describe Agnes in a mind. And in her mind, actually, she is very pagan. She thinks, for example, that the gusts of wind that happen on the farm are essentially gods. She talks about thinking that the flowers will pick up their skirts and go for a walk whilst she's not looking. So there's more, it's a different type of Agnes in the book. And I think it was one of these books actually at the time. So the full title of the book is Rapture in My Rags, by Phyllis Hastings. So back in the 50s and 60s, this was a best-selling novel. It was incredibly popular, which makes it all the more surprising that the movie was just relegated to the backside of a double bill. But I do think it's an incredibly powerful movie for anyone that's ever felt that they're having to compromise too much in their relationship to society, that they're giving up so much in order to fit in, that there's actually nothing left in the end.
Yeah, it's really, really odd. Like you said, I mean, this was Gilman's first American-produced film. It's a bit like King Rat.
It's a great movie.
In that, it's largely British. Like British director, largely British cast, but like the money in studio is American. He did some British films after that, like Blue Max, but this was meant to be like his start of like his big Hollywood career. And I mean, he made some huge Hollywood hits. I mean, like some of them are pretty bad, like Skyjacked, but he made them. He made Death on the Nile. He made King Kong, Towering Inferno, King Kong Lives. He made some stuff like Sheena. He wasn't a respected author, but this was meant to be like the start of his career of doing all this stuff, and it's a really interesting choice. He came off Guns Apatasi, which is another fantastic film he did. Similarly beautifully shot. He did Never Let Go shortly before this too, which is a film noir with Peter Sellers as a terrifying villain. Very, very high, high recommended as well. But this was his most artistic film. It's just weird that it was his American debut, and then it would be Buried, and it was like released in Britain 2 years later, and like you said, it was with a terrible double bill, and people didn't know how to sell it, and it's just so strange. Like this could have been sold as the controversial drama of the year. Who knows? But you're also actually like Dean Stockwell is really good in it. And he's definitely best known for being in Quantum. He wasn't Ziggy, by the way. Ziggy was the AI they had on it.
Yeah, no, you're right.
But he's excellent in it. I'm very sad to hear that he did not like the film. That's definitely gonna hurt it. Once again, like you have Patricia Gozzi in a fairly uncomfortable relationship. I don't remember how old she was. I think she's like 15, 16 when this movie takes place. I mean, she starts a relationship with Dean Stockwell, clearly much older. That is partially uncomfortable. But yeah, this is such an evocative film. I think it's worth noting that Gilman brought in a French cinematographer. It's not particularly big. I mean, looking over his filmography. It's Marcel Chiron. He did some really interesting work in France on some films. Like he worked with Astruc, for instance. But like this is not, one of those filmographers who did a lot of huge films. Like he worked blockbusters, like he worked in the Fantomas films in the 60s, for instance. But it does have a bit of this French quality, even though it's an American production with a British director. It does have a little bit of that raw. Like if someone told me that this was like the director of Sundance and Cybele, like it's not quite the same thing, but I might have been inclined to kind of give it. So it's a very odd atmosphere for the film. I think one thing that the film does best is just how much, like you said, it puts us in the position of Agnes. Like it doesn't tell us what she's thinking, and it's more pagan ideas. Like you mentioned from the book, they don't come true. Like this is a different Agnes, but the way the film makes us feel how uncomfortable she is with sound, with loud noises, and feel for her when she can't cope, when she tries to run away, or when she hides. Those are such powerful, strong moments. And I'm gonna call back to Letter Never Sent again. Like Letter Never Sent has some of these like incredible shots where you just get really extreme close-ups on the side of people's faces, or they get these silhouette shots. Rapture does some of the same things. It's so visually evocative, and it also have so these amazing long takes. Like I think the wedding sequence early on in the film is essentially like after the opening credits and they settled in. Like that's where we go to her sister's wedding, and I think like from her older sister trying to get her father to dance and moving around the room, establishing various characters, to going into the back room where Agnes is hiding, and having that hidden escape being intruded upon and being forced out. Like all of that, if I remember correctly, is amazing long take. And it's an incredibly powerful one shot. And like these kinds of longer takes, like that's the most extreme one in the film. But there's so many just really ambitious takes, really ambitious shots, really unusual shots. And there's just this trust in Patricia Gozzi as well, that she's allowed to really go for it. She's there on the floor, ringing in desperation. She's there running in the street, completely exhausted and horrified. Like it just trusts her eyes, her mannerisms to just convey this person. It uses the visual styles to just complement her, and I think it's a just truly powerful way to make a film. It is the kind of way to shoot films that you don't really see. Very recently, you had this wave of visceral independent films or art house films from Europe, probably from last year, for instance, things like that, where it's very visceral and even more even more focus around characters going through something extreme. Like I think your favorite, like we talked about recently too, like Silver Haze, does some similar things with like the characters and the mental state in terms of shaking it up and staying close. But in this time period, this really wasn't done. It just was so confident in doing it as well. So it's just such a truly magnificent accomplishment from people you wouldn't expect it. Like Gillerman, you wouldn't really expect it. Like you can watch Guns N' Patasi and some precursors and you can see, okay, he could do it. But you just would not expect a film of this magnitude from just if you read out the resumes of most of the people involved, you wouldn't expect it. Yet it happened, and it almost feels like a bit of a magic trick.
You bring up Silver Haze there, which is a movie that I absolutely love. So I'm going to get in a quick plug for the ICM Forums Film Festival that we run every year. So it's essentially what we do is program a festival rather than, this physical location where we buy films or we're streaming the films. We spend a huge amount of time finding movies from the last 3 years that have been underseen or overlooked and suggest to people go and find a way to watch this. So we're not providing the films, but we do a huge programming job, and Silver Haze ended up in the film festival this year. But I think it's just a wider plug for the forum. We do have lots of really exciting projects that we do all year round, and if some of the projects aren't appealing to you, there will be other projects that will. So I think you were talking about the cinematography and quality of it. The movie Rapture actually opens with an incredible aerial shot. The Larbeau family are in a car on the way to a wedding party, and it's on a cliff road, and the plane goes past and then zooms in on them, and I can't overstate how hard that is to do. If you ever look into productions and difficulties with aerial shots, Roman Polanski's Cul-de-sac is another one that springs to mind, that has an amazing sequence where they have to synchronize with an airplane, and is really incredibly hard to do. Blue Max was after this, right? Yeah, Blue Max is 66 and this is 65. The Blue Max, for those that don't know, is a particular type of medal that you could win in the German Air Force for being exceptionally capable. And I don't know if Guillermin was using the same people in both movies to do these incredible aerial shots. So the Blue Max, by the way, one of my younger brother's favourite films. I gave it to him for a present one year and he was absolutely taken with it. So Guillermin's definitely got more than one string to his bow, as Chris was alluding to. I think it's very clear that we absolutely love this film. I'll just sort of end with one point, is that I actually think that the father in the movie is an incredibly interesting story. He's one of these people who clearly is emotionally blocked up, and he's trying to become a good person, but really all he's doing is bullying Agnes. But in the film, as opposed to the book, in the film he's an incredibly interesting character. So if you watch it, spare him a thought as well. And the actor Melvin Douglas is really incredible, to be honest. He's been in a lot of really good films. Let's end Rapture on that point.
Yeah, that's one of the things with Rapture. It has so many things going for it that like, such huge things can be lost in the track. Yeah, Melvin Douglas was absolutely fantastic here. His character is so dynamic and complex as well. So good point. And this takes us to our most recent winner, Birth Certificate. It's only won 1 year. It won in 2024. It's from 1961 by Stanislav Rosevich. And once again, we're kind of seeing ICM Forum's love of Eastern Bloc war films and films led by children, as through 3 30 to 40 minute long vignettes, children trying to survive in Nazi-occupied Poland. Especially the last story is very striking, but all of them are strong. I think this is a powerful film. What do you think about the Birth Certificate, Matt?
I watched this film because it had won the poll, so my memories of it are quite fresh. I do actually think that this is an immense cultural monument, not just within the history of film, but I just think in the history of humanity. I sort of really choked up. It's particularly so, as you mentioned, it's an anthology of 3 stories about 3 children, essentially, Janek, Zbzek and Irka. And the last one is incredibly overwhelming. I think something that people don't really understand, I guess, is just how difficult filmmaking is, just how easy it is to go wrong, for your images not to be interesting, for the story not to be interesting, and all the obstacles that people have to face. And the first 2 stories are really good stories, don't get me wrong, but the third story about this young Jewish girl, Mirka, is absolutely staggering.
I agree.
Piece of music that I really love is Goratsky's Symphony No. 3, the Symphony of Sorrowful Songs. And I actually thought this third part of the movie is on a level with that, essentially. There isn't any shot that is wrong, absolutely everything works. It's 100% accuracy type of third story. And it's called Drop of Blood, and it's really about this horrible circumstances that this young girl has to go through, where Nazi soldiers are trying to round up all the Jewish children and do incredibly terrible things to her, but she's actually mistaken for being of Aryan descent, whatever that means. It's very difficult. We shouldn't pander to a lot of the racial narratives that Nazis came up with, but for whatever reason, for almost arbitrary reasons, they decide that she is genetically precious and therefore must be looked after, and not a single drop of her blood must be spilt. And then when you look what they did to other children, even the opening of that sequence where she wandering around this tenement that she's hidden in, and everyone else has been rounded up, and she's just wandering around, and you can just see how much devastation is, hugely powerful. So it is worth mentioning that third story's incredible, because we wouldn't want anyone to, drop off way through the first story. And again, the first and second stories are good, but definitely wait till the end.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this is also one of those reasons, though, that Birch the Wicked is not a favorite of mine. It's a great movie, but it's not an actual favorite of mine, because the first and second story, they're good, even borderline great, but they're a bit light. They're like many short stories. They put you into a time and place, they introduce you to characters, but then they kind of just end at a specific point that didn't need to be the end. In both of these cases, this could have been the first 30 minutes of a movie, for instance. It doesn't hit quite as hard. I should also mention that this is not a huge production. It's well shot and everything, but it's not, it doesn't have the cinematography of some of the films we talked about previously. It's well shot, but it's a little bit more restrained visually. And the first 2 stories are good. The first one can actually remind me of a bit of Carriage to Vienna. It's a young boy, he's trying to find his family, and he's traveling the roads, and he gets connected with a soldier on a carriage, and they're traveling together, and they have a few encounters. I'm not going to say how it ends. And then you have the second story, boy trying to protect his siblings in an occupied city, and he's seeing some things around him.
Would you agree with me, though, Chris, that if the third story was a short film, de-anthologized, that it would be one of the greatest short films ever made?
Yes, definitely. If that was a short on its own, it would definitely be one of the greatest shorts ever made. And that's the film that has the strongest ending as well. I mean, the ending, we kind of hinted a little bit around it, but the ending, the shot, what we're seeing, it's just so powerful and evocative. It's just absolutely incredible. And I think that the ending, the final story really elevates the film. Overall, it's a great film. These 3 stories kind of set a tone of snapshots of children in Poland just trying to survive. It's powerful. They are a little bit disconnected, but it fits well. But that last act, it's the icing on the cake. It's beautiful, it's powerful, and it consistently gets better too. You said the opening shots in that story is also powerful. You're hearing someone running after trying to find what they call a Jewish boy, and they're looking, and a little bit later she comes crawling out undiscovered, and she kind of just hides. She sees what's happening around her. That's so powerful, but it just continues and continues to build until that really, really powerful
And I'm really glad that we uncovered this one. I think a lot of the project is about uncovering great movies and things that people have missed. You really would have missed out something if you never saw this film.
Absolutely. It also just fits into what we're talking earlier about the Eastern war films and melancholy and sadness. This really interesting motif of just mirroring children against just the terror going on is always a powerful motif. Also, Stanislav Brucevic, I mean, he had a long career. He's an interesting director. He made some great films later. He actually transitioned himself into being a bit of a soft surrealist with some really interesting vibes later. I think The Fox from the 80s is possibly his second best. This is his best. This was one of his first. I think it's the earliest that's available. And it's out on Blu-ray, by the way. Not on Criterion Channel. I don't think you can stream it anywhere, but it has been released on Blu-ray. And it's a very, very good restoration. So you can get it as English subtitles. Seek it out. It will be worth your time. And yeah, with that, I think we have reached the end of our episode. I mean, we might return to this, to be honest, because as you know, like we did a recent episode about our festival, so we always do that every year. We try out obscure films, and now we shouted out the number ones, but obviously we have a current top 10. This is probably going to be changed by, we'll be running our next poll in 2025, but I can say that the current top 10 is Birth Certificate number 1, Rapture on number 2. It went down one spot. It might go back up. Then on number 3, we have Masumura's A Wife Confesses, another big forum favorite. On number 4, we have The Incident, which is just a thriller set on the subway system in the US, where a cart gets taken over by criminals, one of which is played by Martin Sheen. It's so damn tense. Yeah, absolutely should check it out. On number 5, we have Under the Bridges, which is a post-war / was technically shot during the war. Well, then we have one of the few truly experimental films on the list, The Parallel Street, one of my all-time favorite films. I think it's one of your all-time favorite films as well, Matt, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a stunning film, and it's the only feature film made by Ferdinand Kittel. He was an industrial filmmaker, and this is his sole outing. But, if you had to make only one film and then drop the mic.
Absolutely. I mean, this is in my top 10 of all time, to be honest. If you're on the art house sphere at all, seek out this insanely wonderful film. Then you have the Western drama The Grey Fox by Philip Borzos in 1992. You have, I think a lot of people who are interested in Cuban cinema or Latin American cinema knows Tomas Gutierrez Alea. We have Death of a Bureaucrat on 8. We have Henry Verneuil's Eye for Icarus on number 9. And we have the animation film The Pied Piper by Jiri Barta from 1986 on 10th. And this list, we're going to include a link to this list in the description. Like we said, 500 films, less than 400 checks. There's so many hidden gems here that you should check out. And we might do an episode about the greatest discoveries we've had. There's just so many films that slip through the cracks, some of which are resurrected by Criterion, some of which are resurrected by famous directors. You have Martin Scorsese and his World Cinema Foundation, some of which are resurrected in other means. But it's just so hard when a film from the last century got lost to just bring it back to the forefront. And that's one of those things we're trying to do. There's lots of films from this century on the list as well. Just to be clear, nothing is excluded, except I did believe the last year. But check out this list. Check out these 6 films we talked about today if you haven't. And we will have a thread dedicated to this episode up on icmforum.com as well. Drop by. Let us know if you've seen any of these films before, what you thought about them, if we inspired you to seek any of them out, if you have any questions, or if you disagree with anything we've said in this episode. We would love to know. So with that, thank you so much for listening, and join us again soon.
You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.